Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes at BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for joining us. As you may recall, at BlueScope we're quickly approaching the 100th anniversary of the Port Kembla Steelworks in Wollongong, Australia, and the 25th anniversary of BlueScope itself. Capturing this narrative is company historian Craig Nealon, and in this episode he interviews former Chief Executive of BlueScope Australian Steel Products, John Nowlan, who, in November 2025, became BlueScope's first ever non-independent non-executive director, bringing his decades of experience in global steelmaking and company management to the board. We recorded this conversation in Port Kembla the day before John's election to the board was confirmed, and together he and Craig reflected on his career in Australia and overseas, what it meant for BlueScope to forge its own path after leaving BHP, and the powerful contributions of people on the ground who have worked tirelessly through the ups and downs of a cyclical industry. Now, let's hear John's story.
John, thanks for taking the time to have a chat to me. I'm hoping people will find this extended episode pretty interesting. Now, I'm interested in what sort of brought you to the steelworks in the first instance, because you were from regional New South Wales, is that right? Or you grew up not in Wollongong. So what was it that brought you to Wollongong and even to the steel industry?
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. Nice to see you. Nice to talk. So I won't go too much into a family history, but essentially until sort of early high school, I grew up on a dairy farm in the North Coast. The last one that we were at was just near Bangalore, so just sort of inland from Byron Bay. And, it was a dairy farm. The economics were pretty poor. Basically, we milked cows and sold cream, had pigs and all that sort of stuff.
Hard work too, probably.
Yeah, hard work. And sort of at the end of that, my dad had health issues, which I sort of won't go into, but he ended up in Sydney. And then my mum sort of looked after the farm for a couple of years, and then when things weren't sort of getting too much better, sold up. And I stayed up there actually for a while to finish that year of high school. I was going to Mullumbimby High School. They came to Sydney, and North Ryde they bought a house. North Ryde, they both got jobs, and then sort of I came there. So I finished high school at North Ryde High School, which was, the northern sort of part of Sydney. And then I guess I'd always wanted to go to university. I wanted to do engineering. That was what I had in my head. I probably actually was angling at civil engineering, because there was something about working outside and doing engineering that was what I had in my mind. My parents, basically said, if you want to do engineering, you've got to figure out how to get a job and do it part-time, and that was sort of the guideline. So I applied for a lot of places, Electricity Commission, I think the Water Board, there were lots of places that had those sort of cadetships in Sydney, and one way or another, for various reasons, which, anyway, I won't go into that too much, but for one way or another, I wasn't successful. But my dad had a friend, a mate, that was actually worked here at the steelworks, Arnold Ferry. Some people with a bit of history would know Arnold. He was the superintendent at the Cinder plant. So he was a sort of a friend of my father's, and he told me he told my father about the sort of the BHP cadetship program. So I went, well, that sounds like an opportunity to go to university and work at the same time, and I applied for that. BHP in those days, they actually didn't select their cadets, or at that point in time, they didn't select their cadets until after the HSC results came out. And I guess at some point, I'd kind of figured out I actually had to work at school to get a decent HSC result, and I got a pretty good result. So all those other ones that I applied for, they actually selected their intake before the HSC results came out.
Okay.
But anyway, I got a job with BHP as a mechanical engineering cadet. So, it wasn't civil engineering, but it was mechanical, and that's kind of how it started. And it was basically the opportunity to go to work and go to uni, study part-time. It was basically what my parents had said, this is what you need to do if you want to go to uni. So So that's how it sort of, that's how it started.
It's a fantastic program, isn't it? And and there's a lot of people started like that, myself included.
Yeah. The other thing, to be fair about it, was, like I said, we'd had that dairy farm at Bangalow. When my mother and father came to Sydney, I ended up staying with a friend in Byron Bay, and that sort of was where I guess my interest in going for surf started. And you know, this was a bit of an opportunity. It was like, go to Wollongong, you can go and study, got a job, it's close to the surf. What more could you want? So,
brilliant.
So that was, I mean, that was one of the attractions too, to be honest.
So it wasn't the steel industry as such, but you've stayed in the steel industry, right? So there must have been some sort of thing that.
Well, look, I mean, when I started, like, I probably had no intention of sort of staying. It was an avenue to get a job and get an education.
Yes.
You know, and I sort of tell people, I mean, I made some pretty dumb decisions in the early days that I would have made different decisions if I was going to stay. But anyway, it was about getting a job, getting an education, getting through uni, and that's what it started as. But then, I suppose, you know, we started in the training shops, and then I ended up over in the tin mill, sort of in maintenance in the tin mill, and you know, and then I ended up on the slab caster in 1978, or before we actually commissioned. I think it commissioned in, the first slab caster commissioned in November 1978. I ended up on that.
Whilst you're still a trainee?
Yeah, well, I was a trainee. And you know, like everything, and it's still true today, there's always issues, and there's always, like, the shorter supervisors at the tin mills. They end up sort of working night shifts, you know, on shutdowns, or looking after maintenance on the pickle line or something. You know, there was always this sort of, these challenges and these opportunities, and everybody, they'd step up to that, and you learn so much, but also it's really interesting work, and dealing with the people, and dealing with the engineering side of it, and dealing with management, like management sometimes pretty challenging, pretty tough characters, dealing with all that. It was really interesting. And I mean, I loved study. I loved that stuff. You know, it was intellectually stimulating, but I love work too, because there was all this stuff going on, all these challenges. And then kind of ended up in, like I said, at the slab caster, part of the maintenance team, I guess, that was sort of preparing for that commission, and then ended up on shift work when that was commissioned, you know, like as a shift maintenance supervisor on shift work when we commissioned that, and then later as a sort of a maintenance supervisor, I guess a mechanical maintenance supervisor on day shift. Yeah, while I was a cadet. And I guess it was just really interesting work, and like that was the first slab caster was ever commissioned in Australia, so it was the first one that BHP did, and it was really tough. Like
any new piece of gear, there's always things you've got to figure out how to
breakouts, and work to just about stop fixing up a breakout. You go home and you come back and there'd been another one, right? And I guess all that sort of stuff, I got more and more committed to. I don't know about committed, but you got challenged all the time. Yeah.
I've got to ask you, your days at uni, when I did my engineering degree, it was hard.
Yeah.
I think I was a diligent student. I never missed a lecture, and I tried pretty hard, but I was only a pass credit student.
Yeah.
Whereas yourself were, you know, the university medal and a series of awards. What was your secret? Is it something that just came naturally to you, or did you have to work super hard?
I worked hard, yeah. I mean, that probably started maybe a year before the HSC, because I kind of realised if I wanted to go to uni and get one of those cadetships, they were pretty competitive, and I was going to have to work. So it started there, and I guess you just learn how to study and do okay at that sort of stuff, and I don't know.
Anyway, you were very good at it, obviously, and
I worked. I did.
Okay, so that's the secret.
I think a bit of work and a bit of luck is sort of secret to a lot of things, isn't it? Yeah.
So you did the trainee thing where you rotated around, and like you said, you had some challenging work to do, but you found your way, like you seem to have stayed in slab making or the caster and the BOS for a fair while.
Yeah, I did. Like everybody sort of, the cadetship program had this rotation thing that used to go on. like I said, I went to the tin mill and I worked in some of the other flat products things, on shutdowns or breakdowns and that sort of stuff. But then when I ended up at the caster, like that was pretty all-consuming, that commissioning number one caster. Like everything, it starts out that we've got supervision and sort of management and all that sort of stuff in place. And then stuff happens and you end up, we're short a shift supervisor or we're short a day shift supervisor and there's a lot going on, like a lot of challenges with that ramp up and new technology. And then I guess I ended up in the BOS, sort of looking after the campaign repairs in the BOS for a couple of years. And in that period, we commissioned number 3 vessel.
Okay.
So it was another one, but it was much less intense because we'd already had 2, and then the new one was a sort of improvement on the other one. And then I guess Mike Gripton, like I was going, I might go and do some more study. And I actually had an opportunity to go and do some more study. And Mike went, do you want to go on production? And I guess I went, well, like if I'm going to stay, that's the guts of what we do.
Yeah. So
I went on shift work then, worked in the BOS on shift work, sort of doing pretty much every job on shift in the BOS on production. Everything from sort of blowing heats on the furnace to doing injection heats at the back of the furnace to teaming ingots in the,
ingots.
Yeah, teaming ingots, yeah. Mike Gripton had sort of said, well, good opportunity to learn what it's really like. So I worked shift work in the BOS.
So it must have been good then being the maintenance guy then going into operations, so you probably had a much better feel for the equipment and what capability.
Yeah. I had a lot to learn, right? It was easy when you're on the maintenance side to be sort of critical of what the operators were doing.
Sure.
Or what they did or what they didn't do. And probably when I was in that space, I did all the same things, right? Because you're kind of under pressure, you're doing the best you can, stuff doesn't quite work out the way you thought it would work out. Yeah, it was a kind of a learning curve, but a bit humbling too, right? Yeah. Because you'd sort of come at it from the maintenance angle and then you go, well, actually it's not so straightforward. So
the BOS process itself was relatively new then, I guess, compared to now, and it must have meant a bit to you, I guess, when you came back recently when they celebrated 50 years of that process.
Yeah.
Because some of those people you're talking about were there that day.
Yeah, they sure were. Yeah, Mike Gripton, Leo Selleck, like there's a
Bill Fernie,
Chris Carey, Bill Wilkins. Like Bill Wilkins was the assistant superintendent when I was on production there, on shift work there. Yeah, and Mike was the superintendent of the BOS. Yeah, so yeah, it's a lot of history there. And then I kind of ended up, like when we were commissioning the second 2 casters, number 2 and 3 casters, ended up back, like they needed shift supervisors they needed shift supervisors for the old number 1 caster really, while they took people off that were the shift supervisors and the operators and sort of trained them for the new 2 new machines. So they had all these gaps for the shift supervisor roles, and so I ended up sort of going from the BOS back to the caster as a shift supervisor on originally number 1 machine, while people were trained for number 2 and 3 machine, and then that was all combined too. But so I ended up sort of a shift supervisor while we were, on a shift while we were operating number 1 machine and commissioning and sort of ramping up the 2 new machines. So so I spent a long time in slab making, through to I think 1987, I guess,
Yeah. So I've got a little analogy for you, and it's that story about like a school principal. Sometimes you can be the best school teacher in the school and you're brilliant at teaching kids, and then all of a sudden you get promoted away from teaching kids and you become the principal where you have to manage things and manage, politics and budgets and things like that. And I guess the same sort of thing happened to you. You're probably very good technically, and then next thing you know, you're managing people and operations. And was that a challenging thing for you? Or?
Yeah, I guess it was. I mean, right from pretty much leaving the training shop, if we weren't a shift supervisor or a supervisor or something, looking on a section on a shutdown or looking after a line for down days or whatever, like it was dealing with people as well as the technical side of it. And when on shift as a production supervisor, even more so, but you still got technical challenges trying to figure out what's going on with the process and understand the issues and make sense of it and try and make it work,
Yes. But you can sort of do that with logic, can't you?
Yeah.
Not so much with people issues.
No, but getting them all to work together. Like, that is one of the things about slab making, and I think it's true today too. It's a process that's very dependent on people's practices as well as all the automation and that sort of stuff. And I mean, that is true everywhere, right?
Yes.
In slab making, it's true in a big way, because there's a lot of stuff that has to come together. Like everything from the way the refractories are put in and the ladle gates are put together and sort of the way the heat's tapped and all that sort of thing. Like there's a lot of stuff has to come together with good practice from the operators and from the maintenance people and the supervisors and all the rest of it. The people that are doing the operating, it has to come together and to make it all work well. I mean, for me, that was sort of a realisation. Like I wasn't actually managing a strip mill, a rolling process, till we actually started up North Star. It's still very much dependent on the operators, but there's a heck of a lot more automation in that process than what we had. The balance was more, the pendulum was a little bit more in the space of more automation, and still the people practices are important. So, but in slab making, it was just really fundamental. If we don't have our practices right, we don't succeed with what we're trying to do.
Well, whatever you've done, it's worked well. I was going to ask you about North Star. These were the days BHP, there were close relationships with Newcastle and Port Kembla, Whyalla. And sort of probably more so the senior managers would probably rotate around from different places. And this is what's happened to you, right? And you got sent to North Star, or you wanted to go, or how did that come about?
Well, I wanted to go, I ended up in Whyalla then for 5 years. So all that stuff that we'd learned out of, like starting in 1978 with that first caster and then the second lot of casters and the BOS, sort of all that stuff in the steelmaking shop, I guess the caster was approved for Whyalla, I think like 1990 or something like that. But anyway, I went there. So they were sort of recruiting people with some technical and some knowledge about starting up a caster and shutting down the ingot route. I mean, it took us a long time to fully shut down the ingot route here in Port Kembla after that number 2 caster shut up. So there was a lot of learning out of that. And so, I mean, Whyalla, they kind of got the project approved, and I think the plan was that we shut the ingot route down within 12 months, of starting up the caster. And I guess I was one of the people. I mean, there were quite a few people that recruited. Like one of the other guys that actually went with me there was Dave Knights, and he actually ended up going to North Star as well. But so there was a few of us out of the sort of operations team in Port Kembla that were recruited to Whyalla for that transition. So we were there for 5 years. I think we started that in about 93, that caster. We actually operated for the first 12 months, we didn't have a breakout. But that was just all the stuff that everyone had learnt, and we sort of put together about what the discipline, I was sort of talking about operating practices and disciplines, about what the practices were that we had to have to be able to achieve that. But I mean, we'd started to learn about that in 78 and then learn about it even more with the number 2 and 3 machines, because they started up with twin casting, which was sort of a bit of a step up in difficulty, and then we took that to Whyalla, and we had a fantastic ramp up there, and we shut the ingot route within 12 months, so we sort of got that transition done. But I'd sort of been there for a couple of years after we'd started that up, and then this study with North Star was going on, and I was helping Les Gore, who was sort of like in charge of the technology selection for North Star. So he was kind of the BHP steel technology person. So I was helping Les, and amongst other people, there was a few people,
Sure.
but I was helping Les with the technology selection of what we were going to do and what type of slab cast was going to put in, like the hot strip mill, a lot of that hot strip mill that's at North Star, the layout for that, like a lot of that was sort of Andy Mullen and Les Gore, sort of deciding what they'd put in to there. But anyway, I mean, that was going on during 1994.
Yeah.
And then the project, I think, got approved in October 94, and, they asked me, or I kind of said, I mean, because I got wind that they were looking for someone to go to be the VP of operations, and I sort of talked about it with my wife, with Elizabeth, and we went, that sounds like an adventure. So we went, so I got offered the job, and sort of as the so-called vice president of operations.
Yes.
So basically.
Well, it must have been exciting because, it was the new thing, really, wasn't it? A mini mill or different type of steel making, I guess.
Yeah, well, it was essentially, what we were doing was copying what Nucor had done.
Yes.
With Crawfordsville.
Yeah.
And going, we can do this better. So maybe we're a bit overconfident, but anyway. But essentially, that's what was our mindset. I mean, there was a few, like North Star, which was the other half of that joint venture, was actually Cargill. So they had a bit of history with BHP. Like there was relationships with BHP because Cargill had been their agent, and there's relationships there. But they owned a series of mini mills, which were called the North Star mini mills, and they were long products mini mills. And I guess they'd seen what Nucor were doing, or what they had just done with this flat products. They wanted to get into flat products. Yep. And for one reason or another, I mean, there was trade issues then, with the US. BHP did too, right? So they kind of teamed up as a joint venture and said, well, let's emulate what basically Nucor had done at Crawfordsville. I mean, there was a couple of things about it. One of them was that we had a view that we could do it better. And I think history has proven that most of what we did at North Star was better, and people are actually copying that sort of medium thick slab caster, that sort of 2 roughing stands or a roughing and then finishing stand, and because of the quality and the bit extra throughput we'd get, history has sort of said that it probably was better, but it wasn't the ramp up wasn't straightforward with some of that new technology. It was like going back to the first slab cast in 1978. It was it was tough.
Yeah.
I remember, I'll have this number wrong, but I remember sitting down with Dave Knights, who was the caster ladle treatment operations manager, at one point about a year after we started, and going, so where are we? And I think we'd had 40 or 50 breakouts, right, in the first year. I mean, it was really difficult. And when I left there, which was, I guess, maybe 4 years after we started up, we'd actually got ourselves to the capacity that we'd promised, sort of 1.5 million tonnes, which we were doing quite successfully. At that point, I think we'd had sort of 80 or 90 breakouts or something.
Wow.
At that point in time. So it was like going back to where we'd sort of started.
The original caster.
78, it was a tough time.
Yeah, not something you can just buy off the shelf and plug it in and away it goes.
No. But now, today, I mean, it's a beautiful process, and because the slab's a bit thicker, the core quality is better, the productivity's really high, that sort of hard linkage between the caster and the hot strip mill, it's good from energy savings point of view. But anyway, I mean, going back to where you started, I mean, I got the opportunity basically because probably my history with steel making and casting, I didn't know a whole lot about hot strip mills, but I learned a lot there about the hot strip mill process, and that process, you got very little room for error. Like everything's got to run together. Like the arc furnace has got to run, ladle treatment's got to run, the caster's got to run, the strip mill's got to run. Yeah, so there's not much room for error. So getting that right all through, it was a pretty steep learning curve. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it all worked.
Yeah.
But it took you sort of personally, and I guess Whyalla too, it took you away from the surf.
Yeah.
Living it.
Yeah, well,
and the kids and
well,
in America.
I think I think that's a good point, Craig. Like, I used to still go a bit, but seriously stopped when we went to Whyalla. You know, because at that point in time, my kids were young too. Like,
Yes.
I think when we went to Whyalla, the oldest one was 3, middle one was, Jess was 1, and then Albert was born in Whyalla. When we went to the US, I think Henry was 7 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And Jess was 5 and Albert was 3 or 4, something, yeah.
So it's a busy time.
Busy
in your
time,
life.
right, with work and trying to help with the kids. And it wasn't until we came back here in 2001 that kind of that passion started again, yeah.
So when you came back, this was the time that BHP decided that they didn't want to be in the steel business any longer. And it was the formation of what was first called BHP Steel, but now called BlueScope. And you were heavily involved in that, weren't you?
Yeah.
And that must have been difficult to work out, you know, when you're splitting a company up and who gets what and what parts of the company stays where. And
yeah. Like, we'd been in the US for almost 7 years, so I went there at the end of... Well, I started there really October 94. That project was approved that month.
So, sorry, you were in Dallas. Was that working on the project?
So we started in Dallas because we actually didn't have a site at the point where the project was approved. Like, we had a number of sites that were preferred, and in the end, the site that probably Ed Fox, who was our president, who was from North Star, they made a really positive contribution in this way. Like, he felt like we need to get as close to the industrial heartland of the US as we could. So that was really Detroit, you know, the centre of the automotive industry.
Yeah.
We had a site that was actually up closer to Detroit, was probably Ed's preferred site, and then we had 2 or 3 others, right? And Delta was one of them. And so that site closer to Detroit, so this is a long way getting to the point, but the community in the end didn't want us there. So then we ended up at Delta, which was still pretty close to Detroit. And we got all these sort of concessions from the state government about sort of an exit off that tollway and a path to get the heavy trucks into and out of Michigan, you know, and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, it still ended up really close. Yeah, so go back to Dallas. We actually didn't have a site. And I don't think we actually finally landed on that site until maybe May of 95. We're in Dallas until we sort of landed on, this is the site at Delta, and then we sort of got some demountables and stuff set up, so we moved up there. And I think we came up there in about June.
So you had to move to the small town from the big city, I guess.
95, yeah. It wasn't hard. Like, we'd come from Whyalla, so it was a bit of a culture shock, Whyalla to Dallas, and it was kind of nice actually going back up to, well, we ended up living in Whitehouse, which is a town outside of Toledo, so not far from the Delta plant, but it was actually that was nice. So we ended up there middle of 95, but then we left middle of 2001. I'd been there for almost 7 years, but it was sort of getting to the point where I had to get a green card. We're on those sort of visas, and the maximum that I could stay on that visa was 7 years. And I guess Elizabeth went, you know, the kids are getting old. If we stay any longer, they're going to be staying here. And her grandmother was getting older and my parents were getting older, and we went, we need
to come home.
Need to come home. So what was going on then, 2001, middle of 2001, that was when the public listing team was set up. So that was sort of the job or the work that was available, was to work on the public listing team, basically set up for the separation of BHP. So the decision had essentially been made, I think, at that point, or pretty close to being made. But anyway, the team was being set up. So I ended up on the public listing team. But essentially my job was separating a lot of the contracts that we had, you know, that BHP had, and that separating them or setting them up so that we, BHP Steel, could be still covered under them, or setting up separate contracts. And also the raw materials supply arrangements. And the big one was the coal contract. I guess some of us wanted to get the coal mines as part of the...
Yes.
But that didn't work out. And Kirby Adams basically said, you need to get a contract that replicates the benefits of ownership, was sort of the mantra, I suppose. And so that's what we worked on. And it wasn't the only part. I mean, there was hundreds of contracts, but it was a big one, you know. Big one for Port Kembla Steelworks to be able to get a decent contract and long term,
there's a lot of uncertainty that time. You're going to split from the big BHP, and you had this big company behind you, and could you could BlueScope stand alone? And looking back, I think probably, would you say that's been a good thing for everybody involved?
Well,
maybe a bit hard to answer.
It's hard to know. Like, I mean, it's like sort of trying to go, what would the future look like if we stay with BHP? But I mean, in the end, like BHP they were going down the path of primarily focused on sort of raw materials, and I mean, they still had their oil and gas division at that point in time.
Yes.
And servicing China, like they could see what was coming with China, and that was their main focus, was doing that, doing it well. I mean, when OneSteel was spun out, the story at that point was that they wanted to keep Port Kembla because it was a good way to demonstrate the value of their ores and their raw materials. That was what was talked about. I mean, that sort of changed after the merger with Billiton. I don't really know what the thinking was, but I don't think it was a bad thing, like as far as being masters of our own destiny and being basically run by people and being run by a board that was primarily focused on making the steel industry succsuccessful,
So it's turned out a good thing.
Yeah, I think it has been a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. And despite what I said about the coal, I mean, in the end, if we're going to focus on steel, like those coal mines that ended up staying with BHP and then ended up going to South 32, and they've been South 32 have sold them. I mean, they produce a heck of a lot more coal than we need. We wanted, and we still want, influence over what goes on with those mines, and that blend that comes to us, really fundamental for us and important to us. But to be fair, I mean, they are much bigger than what we actually needed to run the steelworks here, So,
okay. Yes.
So, I mean, I understand the reason that decision was made. And we probably argued the other way, but then we got the job of setting up a contract, that had to do the best we can. It was like negotiating with your boss, actually, which was an interesting dynamic, but we hung on, did the best we could. Brendan Lacey, who, I don't know whether you ever remember Brendan, but he was the legal guy here at that point in time. Like, he was big help with all that, from my perspective. Yeah.
Well, there's another world you had to learn a lot about, I guess,
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you don't negotiate those sort of contracts very often, and that's once in a lifetime. But, like, why did I end up on that? Because when we started North Star up, we had a lot of contracts we had to negotiate. And we did that. Like, that was part of the mini mill culture. We didn't have a big team of people. So myself and the department managers, between us, we would negotiate. Like, we'd negotiate all the industrial gases contract, the slag handling and mill services contract, all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Maintenance contracts, we did it. So I kind of had learnt a bit on the ground with when we established North Star, and I guess that's how I ended up in that role. Because it was a job, right? Because I wanted to come back. I was coming to the end of the visa. We decided we weren't getting a green card. We didn't want to stay in the US.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was an opportunity. It was,
I understand.
Yeah.
So all this experience has meant that you've ended up basically running large parts of the business, certainly in Port Kembla. And at one stage you were the Australian manufacturing and New Zealand manufacturing boss as well. So you sort of had New Zealand Steel, is that right?
Yeah, so that was, like, we came back in 2001, and then that public listing stuff, I think we were publicly listed mid-2002, and then I was part of Lance Hockridge's team.
Yes.
So I looked after
I can remember the photo of you all hanging out the train and ringing the bells. I've got a bell on the shelf just there that you...
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Like, part of that I looked after strip and plate, which was the strip mill and the plate mill.
Yes.
The downstream sort of hot processing stuff. And then ended up Illawarra coated products. So at one point, Spring Hill and packaging products were put together. That was about mid-2005, I think.
So that's another new part of the business all over again.
Yeah, and it was sort of coincided with, like, the decision had just been made basically to exit the export industry in packaging products.
Okay.
And it was kind of implementing that and shutting, I think we shut one of the ET lines and shut one of the temper mills, but then that didn't go well in packaging products. So I think about the middle of 2006, the decision was made that it was going to get shut down altogether. Yeah, like there was a downturn in this, like everything had gone really well with all that China demand and steel prices and margins, and there was this downturn, and I guess packaging products was probably our most marginal business in Australia. I mean, it was already in trouble, at the point where a sort of decision was made to get out of the export business, and then the decision was made to shut it down. Well, so that was middle of 2006, and so anyway, one way or another, then I ended up sort of looking after the front end of the steelworks, early 2011, just before the decision was made to shut number 6 blast furnace. So we went through that, and really that was like that, and the Strive to Thrive and the 2015, all that, like in my mind, I put all that together. Like that was all about, we basically halved the front end or the blast furnace capacity in the steelworks and trying to get our cost structure back in line. I think it basically took us into that crisis in 2015, and sort of getting our cost structure sorted out took us 4 or 5 years, really, to get to where we were in reasonable shape from a cost competitive point of view after we'd sort of shut number 6 blast furnace.
I'm not sure if this is the right word to use, but we were facing an existential threat to the front end of our business, were we? And
we sure were. I mean, there was a lot of, the analysts were basically saying shut Port Kembla Steelworks, right? Like the drumbeat from the external market was, we should shut the front end Port Kembla Steelworks.
And it sort of made sense, didn't it? And then we can just
never made sense to me, Craig. But,
that's what I wanted to ask you. Why? The analysts were saying one thing, and okay, just import hot roll coil and do what we're good at in the coating and painting, but. Why didn't that make sense then?
Well, I guess the import model's not a straightforward model. Like it looks all very well on paper. The steel industry is cyclical, right? Mm-hmm. It's very cyclical. And I mean, if I just go back to 76, like everything was pretty strong, 76. Early 80s, we had that sort of first recession. You had to be fortunate to be in the right place, right?
Correct.
Because there was an awful lot of stuff got shut down in the early 80s, and we went from more than 20,000 people in the steelworks to whatever it was, 12 or 13,000 people. And like if you were in the wrong place, it wasn't good. And then we sort of, there's a lot of investment, and the late 80s, I mean, the demand was pretty strong again, right? And then we had the recession of the 90s, and then demand was reasonably okay. And then we had the Asian crisis and a couple of other things in the late 90s. And then the Chinese demand took off, and so if you were importing steel in that, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Like that thing about just sort of trying to keep our domestic footprint and keep it competitive and keep it alive, pretty important. Like short term, sometimes, doesn't look very pretty, but
there's also that factor that if you're processing your own steel, and understand it, more so than something that you're bringing from overseas,
So that was sort of 2015 and 2016. New Zealand Steel, they sort of commissioned the new billet caster early 2016, and I guess Andrew Gary had been there through that and was coming home, and Mark asked me if I'd go to New Zealand because we're having another one of these ramp ups, and they're always a challenge. And so we went. Elizabeth and I, because the kids had long departed at that point, so we went to New Zealand then. But part of it was still sort of looking after the manufacturing part of the Australian business. But I was based in New Zealand, sort of backwards and forwards here.
So they were experiencing similar sorts of threats, were they? I mean,
well, New Zealand had gone through the same thing as we'd gone through, and like that team had done a whole bunch of work, taking costs out of the system, building this new billet caster, so they could feed billets into the Pacific Steel business, because the old Pacific Steel business, their billet cast and electric arc furnace got shut down, basically, as part of that acquisition from Fletcher's. And when we went there, it had been built and the ramp up was underway. But same thing, right? I mean, New Zealand Steel had gone through all the same sort of restructuring. I guess one of the legs of that, or one of the pieces of it, was actually to build this billet caster and get more domestic demand from that downstream long products business. And so that ramp up was in train when we went there. So like every ramp up, it's difficult, right? I mean, it's not necessarily just the equipment, I suppose. It's also reconfiguring the process, because the steelmaking shop in New Zealand had to get used to feeding a slab, which are certain grades of steel, and also feeding billet caster, which is different grades of steel, and they're not compatible with one another. So you've got a problem with a billet caster, you can't just take that steel and put it in the slab caster, right? It's actually a different grade, and it's not what you put through the slab caster. So getting all that to work, there's a few challenges associated with it. But anyway, I mean, that was sort of what was going on. And it was a bit the same with Port Campbell. Like steel prices got better 2017. They got better for New Zealand too. So the combination of getting the billet caster ramped up, getting the production ramped up, pricing getting better. I mean, the whole business results got a whole lot better too, like same as they did here in Australia, in that period of time.
I just remember those times, 2015 and earlier, and from where I was sitting, it was just very much you could not spend anything on anything, and that wasn't important.
Yeah,
and
I mean, we were still investing, but we were going, if we're going to invest, we need to get a 2-year payback, So it's not long-term thinking, but it was pretty powerful thinking as far as we're in a crisis, what's it really going to take? Really hard priorities about what really is going to give us.
So that was that improvement notion, but also like taking costs out. But there's also a people side to it as well, wasn't there?
Sure is, yeah.
You were at the forefront of all of this, right? And there was a lot of negotiations with government as well, to what could the governments and local government and state, federal do to help, but also the unions.
I mean, it was the whole BlueScope, right? Everybody was really focused on that and aligned around what do we need to do to make this successful. So, I mean, there was no sort of, like that alignment's powerful, right? And it's everybody in the organisation, everybody, the shop floor people, the sort of the management, the senior levels of management, all really kind of aligned about what have we got to do to get through this and make this successful. Yeah.
You must look back at some of that time with a sense of pride now when you see sort of what's been happening more recently, the number 6 coming back to life, and the tin mill buildings being repurposed and with new processes. Yeah. It's pretty good. It's quite exciting. Unanderra, the stainless plant, come back to life.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see the investment and the rejuvenation, I suppose. I mean, the tin mill precinct, like those 2 core plate lines that are in there now, the slitting line, that flats line, it's fantastic to see. I mean, the investment number 6 blast furnace is a big deal, right? But I mean, I guess that's part of what we have to do and we're fortunate that we've got that furnace sitting there, right, that we can work on it and get it ready, which sort of eases, given we're only on 1 blast furnace, it eases the transition and some of the stuff that's happened out at the old Stainless site too, right? I mean, it's all about increasing or getting more of our steel into the domestic market, which is really one of the fundamental things. Like at the bottom of that, I have these numbers wrong, but at the bottom of that sort of period, I think our domestic market sales were like 1.75, 1.76 million tonnes, right? Like the bottom of it. And at the height of it in COVID, we had a couple of years at 2.5 million tonnes domestic market sales. But even now, when things are not all that strong, they're still well over 2 million tonnes a year, and that is really important to us. So, like those core plate lines, the slit flats, the slitting. Although we had the slitting out at Unanderra, but it's been sort of bought into the steelworks. That sort of stuff that we're doing out at it's like the pipe and tube mill,
Yes.
you know, the Orcon pipe and tube mill at the stainless side, you know, some of that stuff the BlueScope distribution are doing there. I mean, that's all about sort of getting more of our steel, increasing the amount of our steel that's going into the domestic market rather than going into export, because that's got a better margin.
So eventually you came to run the whole Australian business, which is all these parts that you've now been talking about.
Yeah.
And I guess you're also running the parts that is vitally important as well. Like all this steel's got to go somewhere, like you said. And so the marketing people, for example, the sales marketing people have actually got to find and sell it. And, and all that seemed to, you know, under your leadership, I've got to say, seemed to work quite well. Yeah, well, it's like everything, Craig. We sort of build on our predecessors, right? I started in that ASP role 2018, started 2018, really when Mark Vasella became the CEO. Yes.
You know, and actually I was still in New Zealand for the first 6 months because we didn't have someone there to, like, we separated those businesses, and then Greta came in June 18. But anyway, I started in the ASP role, really start of 18. But, you know, some of that stuff that you were talking about, like there'd been work put together to put a plan around growing ColourBond and growing TrueCore in particular. I mean, there's a whole raft of stuff, but growing those coated product sales, that had been worked on, I don't know, maybe 16, 17, you know, and then we really worked hard at executing that, 2018, 19, 20, 21, and we got a bit of a boost with COVID too, with some of those initiatives. You know, like on the TrueCore front, timber was short, in short supply, it was expensive, so that sort of helped all that work we were doing. So again, it sort of goes back to first thing, we want to sell more domestic steel, and sort of this intermaterial, one avenue for doing that. I mean, we got reasonably high market shares of the steel that is sold, so then it was about where can we get better market share, but where can we compete from an intermaterial basis? And that's where, I mean, ColourBond and tiles is a classic. I mean, growing the ColourBond, particularly in domestic roofing, was an opportunity from intermaterial, and growing the TrueCore is an opportunity versus timber. You know, growing that. And so that was conceived 17, you know, that sort of period, but we worked really hard on it and invested in it with people and money, you know, in that period of time. And we still are, right? And it's helping us a lot. You know, so that's not only domestic steel sales, it's also more premium products and better margins on some of those premium products as well. And I mean, that then led to, I guess, MCL7. I mean, we had worked on, I mean, it's one of those projects where we'd sort of worked on, like when I was at Spring Hill and we were shutting the tin mill, you know, so this was 2006, 2007, we had this sort of concept of an MCL7 at that point.
Oh, wow, okay.
But then, I mean, really it didn't stand up because it was basically being built on the basis of doing more export, right? And we have trouble investing in Australia just on the basis of exporting. And whereas sort of when we got to the global financial crisis and then sort of that increasing demand that we were just talking about, ColourBond, TrueCore, Zincalume in particular, you know, and we start sort of running short of metal coated supply. Now it's about, first of all, we'd sort of recommissioned MCL5 in Western Port in 2018, I think, but then we got it running flat out and we're still short. So then we're going, well, you know, if we want to do well in this market, we've actually got to have metal coating to be able to support those domestic sales growth. So that's where MCL7 sort of grew out of too. Now it's about supporting domestic market sales rather than just building it for the sake of export, which is sort of where it was originally conceived, sort of back maybe 2006, 2007. Yeah.
Would you like to touch on your more recent years where you've probably spent, you know, smaller amounts of time at most of the BlueScope sites where you've been?
Maybe a couple of things I'd say, like manufacturing excellence. That's one of the things that kind of pretty important in BlueScope. Like one of those periods back, and this sort of started actually Project Gold, 2007, 2008, shortly after Paul O'Malley became CEO. Like he had this view that we needed to do more to have some consistent manufacturing excellence practices, and it was one of the things that I worked on with a team of people trying to do that, and I've probably carried that with me then for the rest of my working career. And I mean, a lot of it's based on sort of some of the practices that we learnt here. But I mean, in the end, it's drawing together a lot of ideas like lean,
Yes.
Six Sigma, that sort of stuff. I guess what we tried to do, and really if I go back to 2008, there was a bunch of plant managers, including from the US and New Zealand, so it wasn't just an Australian thing so what really works? What are the elements that really work in our industry that help us in our sort of manufacturing stability and manufacturing improvement? So, I mean, that's where it started, and it really was that group of plant managers that sort of decided these are the elements that we need to work on, and we've been working on those elements ever since, and trying to get more consistent application of them, as far as how we run a stable operation, how we run improvement processes. But then more recently, we've gone back to what are some of the key practices, like the paint line KPV program, and we're doing something similar for AM and cold rolling as well. But that's about what are some of the really key practices that keep our quality under control and keep the process under control, so we don't end up with a big sort of warranty claim or a big sort of issue out in the market. It's moved. I'm not going to say the other stuff. The other stuff's really important and still is very strong, but we're also working very hard on some of those things, or we have been. But I mean, will continue, right? Mm-hmm. Robin Davies has sort of got the mantle for that from the ELT point of view, but the team that does all that stuff in the Australian business, Donnie Martinowski's team,
yes,
here in Port Kembla, I mean, they basically have a role too with sort of helping to make sure we do it globally. And I guess, the last couple of years, it's one of the things I've spent a fair bit of time sort of trying to make sure we've got the right processes, the right kind of, maybe part of it is making sure we've got the right people and the right skills in our other parts of the business to keep running that, because we can't run it out of Australia. It has to be run from those individual businesses. I mean, we have to have the skills and the people in those businesses.
And it's a technically complex business, isn't it?
Yeah, sure is, yeah.
And I know safety's been a part of that for you as well.
Yeah.
I've heard you numerous times talk about safety and the advice that you give, and it's and that's desperately important as well. So.
Sure is. I mean, it's the first priority, right? How do we do it? How do we do it safely? But some of those practices that we talked about, manufacturing excellence and the operating disciplines for stability, it's the same thing with safety, right? It's, what are our systems? What are our practices? How do we go about doing this work and do it in a way that's consistent? And I mean, it's the same foundation for safety too. Yeah, like they fit together pretty well. I guess we have deliberately not put them together because we don't want to have mixed messages on the safety front. Like, safety's got to be standalone and first priority, I suppose, in my mind. Now, how people choose to do that in the future, I don't know, but that's just sort of how it sits for me. But there are a lot of things that are very common, about how we do safety and our practices and our disciplines and our walk the floor thing, which is something that's really important in manufacturing excellence.
Works together.
That works together with safety, right? When we're doing safety audits, we want to focus just on safety, but some of the skills that we learnt and the deep dive that we do on sort of safety audits, it's just as important to be understanding what's really going on from a quality point of view too. But we don't want to dilute the safety thing, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
So when you're talking about mixed messages, I've got to give you credit for kicking off something internally here that we were part of. Yourself and Michael Ray started doing live broadcasts on the internal communication system. I mean, this podcast episode here, I mean, we can edit it, but you and Michael basically went live, so it was totally unedited, and you both put yourself out there, and that became a pretty popular thing, I think, to be able to hear from you, the boss of the Australian business, about what was happening, and in fact, you were asking people for what they wanted to hear about, and you did that. So I think that was a fantastic initiative. and work quite well.
Yeah. It's all new technology, isn't it? Sometimes it's not the most comfortable space for me, but I've got to say, I'll give Michael his due. Like Michael, he would do some preparation and he made it easy. Yeah. I shouldn't say easy. He made it easier.
Anyway, that continues now. Maybe if I can just ask you a couple more things, and this will be totally unfair because I wouldn't want to ask you where you've been across all the BlueScope businesses and, if you had a favourite location, but maybe it's better to ask you if you've got a favourite process that sort of, has endeared itself to you.
Yeah. Favourite process. Well, Craig, I guess I say the only thing I really know anything about is slab making. Like when you sort of live it on shift, you probably understand it to a level that never understand other stuff,
Yeah, I thought that might have been your answer actually, but does that include the steel making process as well?
Yeah. Sorry, when I say slab making, I should say steel making. So it's that BOS sort of steel treatment, slab casting. I mean, when I listen to people in metal coating and painting, I talk to Simon Took. Spent a lot of time with Simon the last 12 months or so. Like Simon understands painting. Like in my head, I kind of get steel making it, casting it, and that's why I say, like I kind of go, you know what? As much as I think I might understand about this, I don't really understand because I haven't lived it. Like I haven't lived it on shift and worked with people, worked with the operators, worked with the maintenance guys, understood the real issues and the variables and all the rest of it.
Anyway, having said that, quite possibly you're the best person that's been across all of these things throughout your career because you've had that sort of career.
Yeah, I guess we learn, right? Everything that we involved in, we learn a lot about it from the people that are operating it, the people that are managing it, the people that are sort of trying to solve the problems. It's osmosis.
So having said that, have you got any other advice for new starters, people joining BlueScope or in the industry that you could pass on?
It goes back. You asked me what drew me to the steel industry. I mean, what started was a way to get an education. Why I stayed was that there was always a challenge. I'm not going to say I loved it 100% of the time because sometimes it didn't, right? But 95% of the time, it was exciting. There's plenty of that stuff in this industry. There's plenty of opportunities and plenty of challenge. And sometimes they don't work out like you hope they will, or it takes a heck of a lot longer. Like North Star took. Originally, I went there for 5 years, right? We'd be done. Well, it was 7 years. It took 2 years longer to actually get to where we needed to get to, So sometimes they do work out. It takes us a lot longer to get there than anybody ever wants or hopes. So all I'm really saying is look for the challenges, and there's plenty of them. It's pretty exciting, yeah. Because
the place has had a history of the places that you've been at, did you feel that was something that connected you more as well? Or people were proud of working there?
Yeah. You go back to 2015, there's a bit of a personal thing in there. Like, I don't know, you can say it's pride. I mean, there's such a history of people that you work with that you're actually sort of working to build on what they've done. You just go, I don't want to be the one that's sort of shutting this down.
Yes.
Don't, right?
Yeah.
Like when we shut the tin mill, that was painful for hundreds of people that lost their job.
Yeah.
For the management, for the workforce, for the maintenance people, it was painful. Like Kevin Lurie, who was the manager there, you could see it in his eyes, right?
We only spoke to people recently about maybe it's a bit like, was the good old days, but they loved working at the tin mill.
Yeah.
They had a real connection to it.
Yeah. That sort of drives, I suppose, motivates. I don't know how to put it. Yeah.
So maybe we'll wrap it up, and maybe I can wrap it up by saying thank you for having that approach to begin with, because the place has been kept alive, right? And it's good.
Yeah. There's a lot of people.
For all of us.
It's not just me, Craig.
Of course. But you were in the chair at certain times when it really mattered.
A lot of people sort of contribute to that and were committed to it. work really hard, you know. We went through all that stuff with the stave stuff on number 5 blast furnace, and that wasn't straightforward. And I did my bit about, this is what I think, you know, with sort of our senior manager, this is what I think we need to do, this is what we should do, sort of convincing people that this is what we should do. But on the ground, you know, there were people on the ground sort of living that.
Yeah.
Day shift, afternoon shift, night, you know, on the ground, sort of living those water leaks, making it all happen. I mean, there's a lot of people.
All right.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to see that you're joining the BlueScope board and you're not lost to us completely.
Yeah.
So, and I just think that's a fantastic arrangement. So I wish you well with that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Craig. Shareholders willing.
Echoing Craig's sentiment, we thank John for sharing his time on Voices of BlueScope, and we encourage you, listening right now, to visit the links and show notes in your browser or podcast app to learn more about what you just heard. Stay tuned for further historical topics and updates, not only here on the podcast, but in our TV BlueScope YouTube channel and dedicated photo archive on Flickr. As always, thank you for listening to our Voices of BlueScope podcast, and we look forward to having you for the next instalment.